everybody to practice listening to three sounds of the bell. And the theme of the retreat is nourishing our roots. So yeah, it's good for us to be reminded often during the retreat. It's good that we remember to come back to our roots. This morning at the ceremony, we practice with our ancestors. So I suggest that while we are listening to the sound of the bell, we can also connect ourselves with the beautiful qualities that we have inherited from our ancestors, our blood ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, our land ancestors. Yeah, we are in touch with those virtues, the insight of our ancestors, and we give rise to gratitude so that we can nourish our spiritual roots. Dear respected Thai, dear brothers and sisters, dear family. So tonight we have our friends on the panel to share with us about their experiences in applying the 5 mindfulness trainings. Yeah. When our friends come to any Plum Village retreat, there's one thing that we never miss giving. That is giving the transmission of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Yeah. And so if nowadays we're talking about global ethics, and so we'd like to introduce to our friends friends who are new to the practice, like the Buddhist vision for global ethics. And that's the 5 mindfulness trainings, a very concrete expression of mindfulness practice. So when you have a chance to look into the text of the training, you see that, the Buddha is also the Buddha's teaching about the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, Mm. And we see how closely the two are interrelated, interconnected. So we see that here in the middle, the Buddha said that suffering exists. So this is the first noble truth. And he also showed us, he reminded us that, it is our practice to recognize the causes, the roots of our suffering, like, the making of the suffering. And once we know, then that we see the end, the end of suffering is also the noble truth. It is true that there is the end of the suffering. And the outer circle, there is happiness. So suffering exists is the truth, but happiness exists is also another truth. And there is a way that leads to happiness, and it is called the Noble Eightfold Path. Mm-hmm. So when we look into the creating suffering, the roots, the causes of suffering, we know that there is a way that causes suffering. But in order to end suffering, we also know that there is a way that leads to happiness. And the Buddha taught us the Noble Eightfold Path. You see here, right view. Right view is one element of the Noble Eightfold Path. We have right thinking, we have right speech. So these three are our actions, right? And when we look into the text of the training, we also see the word interbeing. Interbeing. We see the interbeing of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And insight, we also see the word insight, and our teacher Thầy relate insight to right view. Right view is insight. Okay. So we have right view, which is insight. We have right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So if we have right mindfulness, we are on the path of the Noble Eightfold Path. And if mindfulness is not right, we are on the path of ignoble Eightfold Path that leads to suffering. So with this, I would like to ask our friends to take turns to briefly introduce about themselves, like your name, and when did you take the 5 mindfulness training, and your Dharma name. There's one thing that when you vow to take the training, we ask you to also share with us, to write down your aspirations, why you would like to take the training. And so now I'd like to ask whether our friends still remember their aspiration. And whether they keep their aspiration alive and also often reflect on their aspiration and apply the trainings into their daily life, and how the practice of the 5 mindfulness training evolve over the years. So shall we start with Phyllis? Thank you.
Dear Thai, dear Sister Chan Kang, dear spiritual land and blood ancestors, dear monastics, and dear Dharma family. Hold it closer. My name is Phyllis. I am from the land of the Karankawa, the Atakapa, and the Sana, whose colonial name is Houston, Texas. I received the 5 mindfulness trainings at my first Plum Village retreat, which was 2 years ago at Magnolia Grove, a BIPOC retreat. And it was nearing the end of the pandemic, and I am a palliative care physician in a major medical centers, so we were receiving in a lot of patients with COVID. And I had been through several years of masking up, walking through, almost the whole hospital was an ICU, a COVID ICU. Walking through, looking in the windows at patients, reading the chart, talking to the intensivist and the nurse, and then going back to my office and calling people and telling them, yes, this person you love, perhaps more than life itself, is dying and no, you can't come. So when I went to Magnolia Grove, it was my aspiration to find a new source of compassion. And I wrote a quote from Rumi. Rumi says, "Never give from the depth of your well, give only from the overflow." And I said I wanted to find a way to have that overflow of compassion and not be always giving from the depths of my well. And so my Dharma name is Deepening Compassion of the Source.
Dear Sangha, dear teachers, dear Sister Chan Kang, dear Thich Nhat Hanh, dear Mother Earth. My name is Ivan. I go by pronouns he. I'm from Mexico. Grew up there in the land of Tenochtitlan. Really convoluted land, conquered land. I come from a ancestry of mixed European and Spanish and native Mexican, which has a lot of things in it. A lot of privilege, disprivilege, and living in a place where that was not talked about, but there was a lot of discrimination sometimes based on my skin color and long hair even. And when I came to the US 11 years ago, it became a whole new story of discrimination, and as an immigrant, and constantly being asked, how do you spell your name? What's that? Where you come from? And, I never, at the beginning, was like, oh, it's okay. I'm coming to a new country. I should adapt to the culture. And I think today it's becoming heavy. And it's becoming really important for me to be in a BIPOC retreat. This is my first BIPOC retreat. And I think I'm starting to take agency over my identities and what it means to, be a person of color. And sometimes, sometimes I'm not seen as a person of color in Mexico. So what does that mean? And in the end, it's really challenging to need to identify myself and separate myself from others, and either myself to protect myself or also separation from others. And so I found a lot of solace in the trainings. This practice was very challenging. I came to Deer Park the first time with aversion to monasteries. Sorry. But there used to be a sign, this is it. And I was like, oh, I like that. So the openness of this practice really, and the essence of it, of understanding like this is it, like this is where we are. Yes, there are differences. Yes, there are separation and discrimination, and that is also part of life. So the trainings for me is that it's embracing the joys, the suffers, the anger, the frustrations. And when I committed to the trainings, I had the aspiration to live my life with a steady heart. and not take things to the extreme of very emotional self. So my aspiration was that, and my name, my Dharma name, became Harmonious Continuation of the Heart. Was a perfect practice for me, and I'm still practicing it. So thank you for practicing with me.
Ohali, Gili, Yona, Inegianza, Ilo, Ilimona, Asagalagante. Hello, my name is Mei Li. I'm acknowledging that I'm a visitor and I'm a relative and coming in a good way to this land of the Luiseño, and I'm learning to say this, the Payo Kiwichan people. And we're here on Indigenous land, and so I greet you as a relative and greet our teacher Tai, and Sister Chang Kang, Mother Earth, and beautiful, gorgeous, powerful BIPOC Sangha, I see you. So many beautiful fellow travelers, my beautiful co-panelists. I took what are known as the precepts, the 5 precepts, first through, I would call it a Plum Village adjacent tradition, through people who left Plum Village because of transphobia and homophobia early in 2003. And then I took the precepts or the mindfulness trainings again up at the POC retreat in 2009 here and at Deer Park. And my heart was really craving a way to heal. I think I was in my 30s at that point, and a lot of just activist work and burnout, and sorrow around the ways in which we reproduce harm within our own movements, in our own spiritual practices sometimes. And so I was really called to that, peace in ourselves, peace in the world, justice in myself, justice in the world, right? The idea that we heal ourselves and that we create a calmness and a harmony and the beauty within ourselves as we create it in the world. And I also came into the tradition while I was walking with both my ancestral roots. I'm Cherokee, as Auntie Shireen's reminding me, Chalagi, and Thai. And so, my ancestors have practiced Buddhism for a long time, as well as I was being called kind of home into my Indigenous tradition and becoming a pipe carrier. The first time I came to Deer Park, I had just become a pipe carrier and what that means, So I was walking with both traditions, and what I realized is that, and I say this and share this because I think a lot of us come from other root traditions. Some of us are convert Buddhists, some of us are Buddhists in our ancestral lineage. But what helped me immensely was that mindfulness and mindfulness practice deepened my spiritual practice in the Cherokee community, the Cherokee spiritual community, and the spiritual responsibility I had as someone who carries the pipe for the people. And I was undergoing, several rounds of ceremony to be trained to be a water pourer, to run lodge. And mindfulness is a tradition and a practice that helps you get clear. Our elders say you have to be the hollow bone so Creator can work through you. You pray for the well-being of all creation. But it's hard to get out of your own way because my mind is very busy. I live, the life of the mind. So the practice really helped me come home to a native spirituality as well, and the sitting practice. So I just name that, the activist roots, as well as the, what other spiritual practices you may be walking with. And let's see, I don't remember my first mindfulness or precept name in 2006, but in 2009, my mindfulness training, when I took the mindfulness training, I believe my name is True Reservoir of Compassion. And I continued to walk the path with many of you here. And in 2001, I ordained into the Order of Inner Being. And my name in the 14 mindfulness trainings is True Continuation of Loving Kindness.
Thank you, dear friends, for willingly accepting our invitation to be on the panel, because we know that our BIPOC fellow practitioners love to hear how you practice the 5 mindfulness training in your daily life and in your work life. So before we go further, asking our panelists to share about their practice and their experiences, I would like to also include one thing that we find in each of the training, and to see how they really interconnected to one another. So we say the interbeing nature of all the trainings. So let's say we take the first mindfulness training, Reverence for Life, as one example. When we look at each training, we see it always starts with awareness of suffering caused by. You see, yeah. So we raise the awareness of the suffering, and the suffering caused by so and so, such and such. And then we make the aspiration, we make the vow, we make the commitment. So that is the training that we like to go. And when we apply the mindfulness practice, we train ourselves to refrain from doing harm. We stop doing harm to ourselves, to others. And on the contrary, we try our best to do good things, do the things that bring benefit to ourselves, to our well-being and the well-being of others. So that is right diligence, right? We are diligent in refraining from doing harm, causing harm, and we are diligent in doing good deeds. So I am reminded of what Brett shared in this morning. So we have the awareness, we have the reflection, but what about taking action? Yeah, the third step that we remind ourselves to take action. And it's up to our capacity, our aspiration, right? How far we can go in taking action. And the practice is like a lifelong. So that's why mindfulness training is like a way of living. It's not like something to help us to achieve something that we want, but it's like a way of living. If we want to live our life more freely, more happily, this is the direction that we would like to go. So we see that if we follow the Noble Eightfold Path, then we go to the direction of reverence and nonviolence. And on the opposite path, the ignoble path, that it will go to disregard and harm, you see. So the choice is up to us, whether or not we have right mindfulness, we have right view or not, okay? So now, are you ready? I'd like to ask you a question. Can we start with Phyllis? So regarding the first training on reverence for life. So reverence for life is about protecting life, right? And that also protect us to go to the direction of self-compassion. Yeah. So I'd like to ask that you share about the well-being for yourself and others during times of conflict and hate, how you sit with the feeling of loneliness, and especially when how we handle our emotions. Yeah, like sometimes we have the tendency to get caught in negative thinking. Yeah, so how to practice self-compassion so that you can protect yourself from the, like, in regards to the practice of the senses, the sense impressions, and taking care of your emotions, your feelings, your thinking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. How to practice in an environment of conflict and hate. The Buddha taught that one of the sources of suffering is aversion. And I have an incredibly strong aversion to anger and hate and conflict. The way that I experienced anger in my childhood made me a person that avoids conflict at all costs, non-confrontational by nature and by nurture. A person who would avoid conflict, would even appease a perpetrator, that kind of fear. And I recently, several years ago, a few years ago, joined a new practice at Houston's most prestigious hospital, #1 hospital in Texas, and I joined the palliative care. I was a new physician in the group, and everything started off fine, and then things cooled off toward me until it was open hostility from the other physicians in the group. And for me, it was terrifying. There was one person in particular who would sometimes send me like an email that was so hateful that I would have to stop my hands from trembling before I could type a response. And I didn't even know what led to it. And this lovely black woman that was the secretary, who had been there longer than anybody, said, Dr. Chappelle, these folks are jealous of you. And what had happened was a series of things that brought a lot of attention to me. I mean, nothing that I had planned. Soon after I got there, I got a letter that said, we want to invite you to apply for privileges at Cornell. So I'm in Texas, but I get to be Cornell faculty, so I filled it out, and along with it came Houston Methodist Research Institute and the Houston Methodist Academic Institute. So I thought that everybody got it. I thought it was routine, so I did it all. But then when I got all three, I was accepted for all three, it turned out that I was the first palliative care physician to be accepted to any of those, and that started the pattern of envy. There was one of those wealthy Texas, oil baron type. His mother was in the hospital. The poor thing was frail and 99, but when you have money and power, you can stop anything, including death. So all the, and it's Texas, so So all the specialists were appeasing to him, He had that long money and just power. And so the cardiologist, well, maybe we can replace her valve. And the pulmonologist, maybe we can do this. And the rheumatologist. And so I talked to the patient, and I said, what is it that you want? And she said, I just want to go home. I don't want this. I don't want any more of this. I'm ready to die. I've had a good life. And so I approached him privately, because I didn't want it to seem confrontational. And I said, you know, your mom, she really doesn't want all this. I'm just wondering if it might be better to just let her go home and, you know, live out what time she has with the best possible quality of life. So he did that. But then, you know, we have these boxes you got caught carrying, and you put a little note in there if somebody did something good. But when you have that much money, you don't work like that. So he, on his, you know, letterhead, his Power Man letterhead, sent a letter to the president and the CMO and the CEO and said that I was only able to face my mother's unexpected, 99 and frail, her unexpected, death. Like, who knew that was going to happen? He said he was only able to face it because Dr. Chappelle walked him through. So then that letter got circulated and came down to my department. So that started more. And then there was this sweet black guy with a terminal brain cancer, and he kept mentioning his fiance. And so I could tell there was some tension with the mother in the room. So I didn't say anything in front of the mother. But when he was in radiation therapy, I went down to the basement to radiation therapy and said, so this fiance, are you hoping to marry her? And he said, yeah. And I said, would you want to marry her here? And he said, no, because he thought I'm at the hospital room. I said, what if we did it in the chapel? So he said, yes. So I asked the chaplain and my social worker, and the nurses got involved and decorated the chapel. And somebody mentioned it to PR, and so they asked the family, would it be okay? Yeah, right? So it's Texas. So they asked the family, would it be okay if they invited the news? So 3 news channels came, and somebody said, there's the doctor, and I didn't know what was going on. Then all of a sudden, people were clipping mics on me. They don't ask you. And they start, so you just came up with it, all this kind of stuff. So I forgot to tell you. So I had asked him, did he think his fiance would be okay? Maybe she wanted to be married in a big church somewhere. Would she be okay in the chapel? And he said, I think so. And he said, would you ask her? And so I said, okay. So I called the woman up. I never even met her. I called the woman up and asked her if it would be okay to get married in the hospital chapel. She said, yes. So anyway, so the news is there. And then I didn't know till I saw the news clip. Somebody said, it's on the news. On the news, she said, the hospital did everything. Dr. Chappelle even popped a question for him. Wait. I thought I was asking her, was the chapel okay? But apparently I was asking her to marry him. Anyway, so, and it was so sweet. He said, he came in a wheelchair because the tumor was already progressing. One arm hung down and his face, but he said he was the luckiest man alive because he was marrying his best friend. Well, then, since it was February, one of the national channels picked it up as their Valentine's Day human interest story. So now the hate in my department has really escalated. And so I'm just miserable. I'm afraid and I'm miserable, and I don't know how to deal with stress, conflict. And what happened was I decided to fall back to my root tradition, which is Christianity, and forgive. So I'm having all this daily trauma, but I'm saying, okay, I just got to forgive. Oh, yeah, I'm into it. I'm doing the work of forgiveness. So we had a meeting, and I hope I'm not running on too long. You just tap me if I'm going on too long. So we had a meeting, and I was a little bit late because I was with patients. And when I walked in, there was only one chair left, and it was next to the doctor that was most rageful toward me. And I stopped. But it wasn't like I said, I don't know if I want to sit next to her. It was my body stopped. And I realized, well, somebody had to point it out to me. I said, maybe I'm failing at this whole work of forgiveness. And they said, this has nothing to do with forgiveness. That was a primal reaction to trauma. You either fight, you flee, or you freeze, and you froze. And then that broke something open in me, and I was able to have some compassion for this person that's going through this day after day. And there's a gatha that I started using from Thich Nhat Hanh called Letting Go. And he says, hearing the bell, I am able to let go of all afflictions. My heart is calm, my suffering ended. I learned to listen to my suffering and the suffering of the other person. When understanding is born in me, compassion is also born. I learned to listen to my suffering. I learned to turn toward my suffering. I start doing loving kindness meditations. Now, I know most people have like 3 or 4 little lines. Mine has like 20. I have the longer one from Thich Nhat Hanh, about embracing your suffering. And I added some Christian ones and some poets, and mine is so long. But anyway, I was just practicing, and it did lead to compassion. And then something happened about listening to the suffering of the other that he said. And this will sound strange, but I was driving home and I came upon a podcast called This Jungian Life. And it's 3 Jungian analysts, and they discuss a case. But it was near Christmas, or it was the rerun of their Christmas one, and it was the Grinch on the couch. So it was the Grinch who stole Christmas. Y'all know. All the Who's down in Whoville like Christmas a lot, but the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville. Y'all remember that? Did not. Okay. So I love that. I probably could tell you the whole book. But anyway, what they said was, because Monica said they're jealous of you, but what they said was there's a difference between jealousy and envy. And I never heard it described this way before. They said when you're jealous of somebody, you consciously want something that they have. But they said when you envy somebody, you won't even allow yourself to be consciously aware of what they have that you want, but you're driven to destroy it. And then I understood, because if you have a very fragile ego, if the I-beam of your soul is fragile, and somebody comes in and it seems like they're taking up all the attention and all the accolades, and you can't face that's what you want, the accolades, the attention. You can't even acknowledge it, but you just have to destroy it. And then I had compassion for them. Then I had compassion, especially for this rageful one. How miserable she must be to have to destroy somebody over something like that. I know that Kyra Jewell says in their new book, tell me the name. Healing Our Way Home. Yeah, she said you can't skip over the anger. You can't skip over the judging of the other person or even wanting to retaliate. You can't skip over all of that. And you have to go through that to get to the pain. And she called it the compost to get to the healing. And the mindfulness training, so if I didn't bring them in, but it suddenly dawned on me. They ain't asked you to talk about all that. But anyway, but it suddenly dawned on me. But that I need to address that. Reverence for life. The life that I wasn't reverencing was my own. The life that I wasn't reverencing was my own. Walt Whitman said, I contain multitudes. Some people have an inner critic. I have a group of ladies, a whole bunch of them, and they just have a commentary going on about everything, and they just beat up on me all the time. But the listening, I had to listen to my suffering and listen to a different voice other than the harsh voice, and to have that deep compassion. And in true love, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the 4 aspects of love. I had to turn to loving kindness and compassion and joy. And rather than equanimity, he uses the term inclusiveness. And for me, that is, I have to include the parts of myself that I don't like. The wimpy, scared of everything part. I have to love that part too. The one who's afraid to speak up. I have to love her too. Yeah. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phyllis, for your very interesting story that made people laugh. But there's one soft reminder that we are here to PR the 5 mindfulness trainings. You want to get people to receive the trainings. So please make sure that you, well, yeah, of course you can share about your experience, your practice, and please remember to mention which training that you apply. Yeah, just to help
Which is
our
probably
friends.
why I'm the only one up here that doesn't have brown on.
Okay, seems that Evan is ready. Yeah, so Phyllis share about self-compassion, and now I'm asking you, yeah, we know that trauma is the word for, the modern word for suffering nowadays, yeah. So I'd like you to share about like healing the trauma so that we can be a better ally to our BIPOC friends, BIPOC practitioners to help uplift the community. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I did hear every single training in your story. There was, yeah, there was loving speech. You know, it takes a lot of compassion and practice to be able to bring something like that to someone who's about to die, and receive news and give news and be steady and rooted. So I think you have a lot of true love in you and deep listening to understand what they want and what is truly needed, because sometimes we go through desires that others have on us and expectations on us, but what we truly want is not expressed, and we need someone as compassionate as you to hear it, to express it. So yeah, I think you nourish all those seeds in people, and so I see every single training in you. So thank you. And I'm not going to share something as deep as her. So, yeah, I'm really honored to be with these panelists with such wisdom of every one of you. I thought this was going to be something simpler as other times. And I was sure I can do this. But so I'm being very nervous, and I don't know what to share exactly. But right now, I think I have an 8-month-old baby, so everything around me is about that. And so I'll talk about the trauma that has been there. So this has been the most challenging moments of my life, and the most wonderful. It's everything that life is all about has been this baby, and has made me feel part of Earth and the universe in all its forms, in all its frustrations and hardness and all its love. And it all comes back to that. It all comes back for me to remembering how the essence of who we are as beings. I think traumas and fears and frustrations and peace and wars is something so human. And we forget to go back to the earth, the cosmos, the universe, nature in us. At least I forget that. And that lives there, but also it's not really manifested in violence, in perpetration of separation. You know, yeah, the plant, you know, the sage might be next to the manzanita or to any other plant, and they're not jealous of that they're getting the sun. They find another way. They're not jealous that the water is going more to the big tree. And they still bloom. They still show us their beauty. They still grant us that beautiful joy of life. And they don't separate themselves. And they don't have jealousy. They don't take that as a trauma. They release it every season. And they go dormant, and they're okay with it. And then they come alive again and stronger and more resilient, processing that, what we call trauma as humans. I think they just call it, I don't know, life. Water running, water not running, sun coming, sun going, and that's it. So I've approached trauma right now as a lot of my child wounds coming back to my baby have come up, and I have traumas from abandonment and from betrayal for different reasons. And it's been really hard to accept my family and to open my self to receiving their love when I didn't receive it. And one of the hardest things has been seeing my dad, hugging my daughter, loving her, crying to her, and never receiving that from him, and just opening my heart to that. He does have love in himself. He does want to share that. He does care about me and others. For whatever reason, he's not able to do that to me. But I don't want to impede that for my daughter or for others. And it's been hard to share my daughter with others. I've become very apprehensive of her. But then I see how much joy is shared. And it's like, how can I not release my traumas? How can I not leave that abandoned child, that unvalidated person, to share the joy? To share that what is just true in us, in every single being on this earth. So the plants have been a really good resource for me. I hike every day in 2 different trails, but I go in every one, like each time. So I know them now so well, and they have taught me so much to recycle things, to just be with what's happening. There's also humans that are just trimming it like crazy because they want to ride their mountain bikes, or because they think it's a fire hazard. I don't know, even though it's a native plant that actually some of those help prevent fires. So going every day, visiting the same trail has helped me to, I don't know, see myself again and again and again, and through my changes, and relate to that, and be able to just go day by day by seeing like, hey, now there's this other piece of of suffering that I didn't see, and that it can go away. Because my heart is so wise to recycle everything that comes through it. I got to that realization by reading something. Someone said that these are all impressions of the heart. And I went to my heart, and I was like, my heart can get the blood in, my lungs provide oxygen to renew the blood, and then it can go out. And it can keep beating and beating and beating. And recycle and move those impressions. And then I don't need to worry about what I think it's still there. We talk about the second arrow. Well, there's no arrow, really, for me. Now I realize that it can just go, it can just flow, it can just be transformed. And coming back to how to be with an ally to other BIPOCs. I don't know if this helps, but for me, I didn't want to be in BIPOC retreats for many years. I didn't, at the beginning was thinking of separation, then I think it was a lot about not willing to go to my trauma, to see what was there. And also, in some spaces I experienced a lot of anger and frustration, and I just didn't want that. I just didn't want to immerse myself in that. Even though it's a reality and it needs to be addressed, and I don't want to step away from it but I just didn't want to address it in a reactive way. And that's the most important part of the practice for me, is like not react to these impressions of the heart. Because then the arrows just come and go deeper and go through my back. And then I start having pains in my back. But then I've learned to just be with that and see through what is happening, see through what's actually going through people, and deep listening. And deep listening to me is allowing myself to be changed by what I listen to change my perceptions. So now I'm really grateful to be in a BIPOC retreat and be with everything that comes, and also how easy it is to receive that, to be with everything in a way easier way. And yeah, I guess there's a component to the collective trauma that can be collectively healed, and I think there's the element of collective consent. I think there's a big consent here on what BIPOC entails. And that on itself gets so much freedom and release of trauma for me. Yeah, I guess being seen or being heard, being deeply listened. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for listening.
So, dear Meili, we heard earlier that you walk with two roots, Buddhism and the native spirituality. So I'd like to ask the question regarding true happiness on the second mindfulness training. So in the second training, it says that I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. So we see that the feeling of being generous is not enough, right? So I'd like to ask Meili to share, in what way we can express concretely generosity.
Thank you, sister. I'm like awareness of time. It's been an hour and we're only on the first one. So I was like, the professor in me is coming out like, okay, moving on. But just for me, like the first teaching about reverence for life, and the precepts in general, I think what's important is that like the idea of engaged Buddhism, these are engaged ethics. So, and they're also practiced in community. So for me, reverence of life, like I don't want to be part of a Buddhist practice, a spiritual practice that's just making us okay on the individual level, like to go on, but like it's like a kind of self-care regime. If we live in a toxic, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, white supremacist world, but we just calm our nervous systems by meditating every day, then we're perpetuating, we're like the violence. So I think that's important to think about the individual and the systemic. So a lot of times we take the precepts like, I'm not killing, so I'm cool, right? This is, I think we're taught to be like individualistic. I'm not doing that, so I'm cool. But I am part of a country and I pay taxes to a government who's arming a genocide right now. And so just holding like the individual and the systemic together, how do I practice my first precept? And then how do I practice it in community? And then for me also over time, I think is important. So a lot of times I think people get stuck on like, well, I recycle. I do the small things, which we all have to do, to care for Mother Earth. And then what's for me important about this tradition is that we hold the sorrow and grief of being part of that no separate self, right? So we're caught up in a cycle of suffering that's reproducing a massive scale of violence over and over, and that, yeah, like we could drive an electric car, but the batteries are harvested in a way that displaces Indigenous people, right? So holding both and is part of the tradition for me that's really important. And the second mindfulness training, true happiness, as a Native person, you know what I read in here? I read, I shall not possess anything that doesn't belong to me. And that's about land and land back, right? So a lot of like the idea of that we're learning how to acknowledge what Indigenous land we are on. I have this really brilliant colleague who's a college teacher who says that's like stealing someone's computer, and every time you boot up the computer you go, I like to acknowledge I'm using your computer. Yeah? And so, yeah, but then I'm not gonna give it back to you, but I'm just gonna acknowledge every time that this is your computer, and I'm using it, and you will never get it back. And so for me, it kind of gets me to the idea of that one of the major ideas of Indigenous sovereignty is land back, right? That we can decolonize, we can have an awareness of settler colonialism, right? That it's not just an event that happened in time, but it's a structure. And it's hard and painful because a lot of us come from migrant and refugee communities, and we learn the American hustle, like we gotta buy stuff, we have to buy land, we need to have property, etc. But we're also being conditioned and indoctrinated into a colonial system. So we're becoming settler colonialists, essentially. And so that I know people freak out that I'm using that title because I am also a guest on Indigenous land as an Indigenous person, right? We're walking on someone else's territory on the land. And Mother Earth is bountiful, and I love the tradition, how we connect. But what if our monasteries engaged the communities whose land they're on? Indigenous Native youth have the highest suicide rate out of anyone in the country, in the world. What if we had programs where Native youth in this community could be here? What if we held the land in trust? What if we had land back, right? What if we, so for me, this mindfulness training is, do I individually steal things? No. But am I part of a system that's property, right? It's an American value. The American dream, it's based on property. But it is a system that displaces and continually displaces and owns things that shouldn't be owned, right? So how do we practice the precepts in ways that get at, for me, the individual practice, but also our collective, the collective historic suffering, the collective suffering we don't mean to cause by our electric cars. And for me, that's about transforming suffering. Truly transforming suffering is getting at it at both the individual and this larger systemic way. Yeah. I think I have something I'm supposed to share about the next mindfulness training. Would you like me to move on, or bow out? I'll bow out. I'm trying to be like time, people. It's like, well, you know why? Because they're like lights out 9 p.m., but I'm like, we don't end, so I'm like, let's just. And I want to connect to the mindfulness.
Let us listen to one sound of bell before you move on.
there's no question, I can just go for it. The next
Question.
third.
The third training is not, is a training that not many of us dare to mention, but Meili has the courage to share about it. So yeah, we invite her to share, like how true love shows up in the face of challenges.
Yeah.
For example, in the face of abusive actions.
Yeah.
We'd like to hear from you.
Oh, I think a lot of what's been shared about healing, compassion. So this precept, you know, I confess to having roots as, you know, a radical feminist. I'll just put that out there. I'm also queer, and so, you know, I'm turning 55 this year. Holy cow, I'm turning 55. But I think I started first practicing with the precepts in my 30s. And as a young queer person, this precept was changed. So it used to say that you only practice, you know, your relationships to me, it was like, it didn't say heterosexual, but it said, you know, that you have to declare it to the world and everybody, which was hard for queer people if it's not safe to come out. So this has been rewritten, recognizing the diversity of human experience. I'm committed not to discriminate against any form of gender identity or sexual orientation. So flowers for that. This has been a long time coming. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. So, yeah, there's a lot here, but as a young queer person who is in a community, there's a lot of polyamory, there's a lot of ethical non-monogamy. This was hard, right? Because you could have a lover who wasn't your primary partner. You could have a lover who, like this, and originally the language of this was very specific to heterosexual coupling. And what does it mean to be heterosexual? And so what does it mean to be queer? I feel like queer folks are always the ones who are raising the issues about, because we have to, right? Because we're non-normative, we're gonna raise it. So I came into the tradition through a trans meditation teacher, Katrina Reed, and she rewrote this precept honoring, you know, Mother Audre Lorde, right? That this precept is essentially about mindful of our erotic power or mindful of our erotic energy, right? So for me, this is about how we tend to our own erotic energy, and we have a lot of decolonizing to do about how repressive spiritual communities can be around erotic energy, but that the idea that erotic energy is an energy we all possess. It's not just about sex, it's about your creativity, it's about your cooking, it's about your salsa dancing, it's about, you know, so many beautiful expressions of life. So your erotic power is much bigger than sex and reproduction and pleasure and lust. And so I just wanted to speak to this because when I first took these precepts, you know, there's the one about consumption too, no alcohol. I was like, what? You know, no alcohol. And that was a really hard one to keep in my 30s. And then I became a pipe carrier. And that was totally, like I haven't drank in decades, and it was totally fine. Like I don't alter my body so I can have a connection with Creator. That's totally easy. So what's interesting is that your relationships to the precepts change over time. How you practice them, because you may take the recitation, it's a transmission of energy. It's a transmission. So you receive them and you hold that transmission, but you also practice them in community. So when you recite the mindfulness trainings, you talk about them. What does this mean to you? I had a beautiful conversation with my sister Chris. We did a training on what does this mean for radical queer sex positive people, right? What does this mean to have this, this training in our lives? And so, yeah, I think it's important because it also helps us have the language to talk about sexual misconduct, which is rampant in religious communities. It's rampant in Native communities, it's rampant in Christian communities, it's rampant in Buddhist communities, because we're not brave enough to talk about how we tend to our own erotic energy, right? How do we care for it? How do we take care of ourselves, right? How do we take care of ourselves as a community? We also know that, I think I think the statistic is 1 in 3 women will be victims or survivors of sexual violence. Or is it one? I think it's 1 in 4, but it's 1 in 3 for women of color, so for us. And that's an FBI statistic. This might be an old statistic. If the FBI can count that, it's probably much higher. So there's an epidemic of sexual violence in our culture. Of course, that's going to bleed into our spiritual communities. And so how do we keep good boundaries? How do we talk about this openly? How do we break the silence? For me, a lot of sexual misconduct is because people were taught that as children, but also we were taught silence and repression. We weren't taught to talk openly about it. And what if you had a sangha where you could talk about it, right? So to me, this is what this training is about, is how to care for our erotic energy and how to find love that isn't based on, purely lust. I'm not saying lust shouldn't be part of the world. It's part of the human experience. But for me, this is an important thing about how to take responsibility for your erotic power and how to hold the community accountable to take care of it as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Meili. When the monastics recite our monastic precepts, there's one saying that goes like this. The precepts, the trainings are like vast ocean. One lifetime alone is not enough for us to study. Let alone we have only 1 hour and 30 minutes. So, yeah, we have to end our evening session here so that you can have a good rest, so that you can be recharged and fresh for tomorrow meditation. Yeah, and thank you so much, dear Phyllis, Evan, and Meili, for your wonderful, beautiful sharing and experiences. Yeah. Before we end, we'd like to ask our friends, especially those who have not received the trainings, if you are inspired to take the trainings, please feel free to fill out the application form you can find on the other side of the text of the training. Yeah. And so you can also reflect on the aspirations, why you aspire to take the training. You may like to take a particular training or some trainings or all 5. Yeah, but please reflect deeply before you make a vow to take the trainings. And you will give the application form to the facilitator of your Dharma sharing group. Yeah. Again, coming back to the theme of the retreat, nourishing our roots, we are right in this lifetime, the children and grandchildren of our parents, our ancestors, but we are also the parents, the grandparents, and the ancestors of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren in the future. Yeah, so it's good that for us to bring to the awareness that we have inherited all the beautiful qualities from our ancestors, and it is our aspiration to continue to nourish those beautiful qualities, and also to recognize the not so good, the unbeneficial traits that we have inherited from our ancestors. Now with the practice, we know how to embrace and transform to heal. Yeah, so that we can pass down onto our next generations the best we can. Tomorrow world, where does tomorrow world go? It depends on how we live our life in the present moment. What we want to leave for our future generations. It depends on our attitude, the way we live our life. So thank you so much for your practice and for your listening. And together we can build a collective awakening, right? Yeah.